When my daughter boarded that plane and left me standing on the pier in Maldives, I thought it was a misunderstanding. But when I realized she wasn't coming back, something inside me broke. The wind was warm that afternoon, brushing against my skin like a false comfort. The sea sparkled beneath the sun, clear and blue like glass. All around me, people were laughing, couples holding hands, families taking pictures, children running barefoot on the wooden dock. It was supposed to be paradise. But for me, that pier became the loneliest place on earth. I can still hear the sound of the boat engine fading away, the faint echo of my daughter's voice from that morning, pretending everything was fine. I had smiled at her as she wheeled her suitcase toward the departure gate, believing she was just going ahead to check something at the airport. She told me she'd be right back. She even kissed me on the cheek. But minutes turned to hours. The resort staff approached me, asking gently if I needed help. That's when one of them said it, words that punched the air out of my lungs. "Sir, she's already boarded the plane." For a second, I thought I'd misheard them. No, not her. Not my only daughter. Not the girl I raised with my own hands after her mother died. The girl whose first steps I held, whose tears I wiped when the world felt too cruel. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands, tried to call her. Nothing. Text after text, no reply. My voice cracked when I tried to speak to the airline staff. All they could tell me was, "She's gone." The sun felt hotter then, burning against my neck. My legs trembled beneath me. I wasn't just abandoned in a foreign land. I was abandoned by the one person I never thought would betray me. As laughter and chatter filled the air around me, I stood completely still, a 60-year-old man in paradise, suddenly realizing that paradise had turned into a prison. My heart wasn't breaking because I was stranded. It was breaking because it was her. Before I tell you what happened after she left me there, make sure you subscribe. This isn't just a story. It's a warning. I should have seen it coming. The signs were there, tucked into the small, quiet moments that I chose to ignore. She had called me 3 weeks earlier, her voice unusually bright. "Dad," she said, "how about a trip? Just the two of us. You need a break, and Maldives is the perfect place. It'll be like old times." She hadn't called me Dad that tenderly in years. And like a fool, I wanted to believe her. Ever since her mother died, I had done everything for her. Every choice, every sacrifice was made with her in mind. I sold land to send her to college. I worked 2 jobs to make sure she never lacked anything. She was my pride. My entire world. And when she suggested this trip, my heart ached with something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Hope that maybe, after all the years of distance, the girl who used to hold my hand when she crossed the street still loved me the way I loved her. The first few days were beautiful. Maldives was as breathtaking as I'd seen in pictures. Clear turquoise waters, gentle breezes, skies painted in gold at sunset. I could still walk along the pier, even though my knees weren't what they used to be. She laughed, took photos, ordered drinks, told me to just relax for once. For a moment, I believed we were healing. But then there were small cracks. She was always on her phone when I tried to talk to her. She'd walk a few steps ahead of me instead of beside me, like she couldn't wait to be anywhere but near me. When I'd bring up memories of her mother, she'd change the subject. One night over dinner, I told her, "You know, it feels good being here with you again." She smiled, but her eyes didn't. "Yeah, Dad. It's nice." Something about the way she said it felt rehearsed. Cold. Like she was already somewhere else in her mind. I pushed it away. I told myself I was overthinking. After all, she had brought me here. Surely that meant something, didn't it? On the 4th day, she started talking about finances. Out of nowhere. "Dad, don't you ever get tired of managing everything by yourself? I mean, the house is too big for you now. It's a lot of work." You should let someone else handle things. Maybe, sign things over so it's easier when you're gone. Her voice was light, casual, as if she was just making conversation. But the way she looked at me wasn't casual at all. It was calculating. Measuring. I laughed nervously and brushed it off, but inside, a part of me tightened. Why was she bringing this up now? By the 5th day, her distance grew. She disappeared for long stretches of time, always with some excuse about checking something or taking calls. Still, I held on to the image of us sitting on the balcony together, watching the sun set over the water, sharing quiet moments like father and daughter again. I wanted to believe the warmth in her smile was real. I didn't know then that what I thought was the beginning of healing, was really the beginning of a betrayal I could never have imagined. The trip I believed was a gift was never about me. It was about what she thought she could take from me once I was out of the way. The betrayal didn't come like a storm. It came like a whisper, quiet, smooth, well-planned. On the last evening of the trip, she suggested we spend our final night watching the sunset by the water. She wore a white sundress, the kind she used to wear as a little girl on family trips. She laughed a lot that night, more than usual. If I didn't know what was coming, I might have believed the smile on her face. We walked along the pier, and she pointed out the boats bobbing gently in the clear water. "You've done so much for me, Dad," she said softly, looking at the ocean. "You've given me everything. I'll make sure everything you built doesn't go to waste." Those words should have comforted me. But something about them made my chest tighten. Later, she suggested I stay back at the resort after dinner while she ran a quick errand at the airport. "It's nothing serious," she said. "I just want to handle something ahead of tomorrow. I'll be back before you even finish your night tea." I kissed her on the forehead, like I always did, and watched her leave. It was the last time I saw her face before everything shattered. The next morning, I woke early. The sun was already rising, spilling gold over the sea. I ordered breakfast for 2. But she didn't come. I called her phone. No answer. Hours passed. I went to the front desk. The woman behind the counter smiled politely, then checked the system. "Sir," she said gently, "your daughter checked out last night. She took the early flight." At first, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it made no sense. No, that's not right." She said she was coming back. But they showed me the record. Her signature. Her payment. Her departure. I felt the world tilt under me. My heart slammed against my ribs. I tried calling again, and again, and again. But all I got was the same cold, empty silence. I remember standing outside the resort lobby, the sun burning down on me. The air smelled of sea salt and coconut oil, sounds of tourists splashing in the water. Around me, the world was alive, bright, beautiful. But inside me, everything went silent. She left me. My hands shook as I checked my bag. My passport. My wallet. Gone. Everything, gone. I stumbled to the pier, scanning the horizon as if she'd magically appear, waving from a boat, saying it was all a mistake. But she didn't. She had taken my passport, my credit cards, my phone, and left me in a foreign country with nothing but the clothes on my back. I sat down on the wooden dock, my knees weak, the sun beating against my neck. And in that moment, I wasn't just a man stranded in paradise. I was a father betrayed by his only child. I thought of her as a little girl, how she'd cling to my hand when she was scared. How she'd crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. How she cried the day her mother died and promised me, "Daddy, I'll never leave you." And now here I was, alone in the Maldives, while she flew across the sky without looking back. What cut deeper than the abandonment was the coldness behind it. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was planned. Thought out. Executed like a stranger plotting against an enemy. I felt the sting of tears, hot against my cheeks. Not just because I was stranded, but because somewhere along the line, my daughter had stopped seeing me as her father and started seeing me as an obstacle. She didn't just leave me behind. She erased me. And as the day faded into night, and I sat alone on that pier while the world moved on without me, a quiet rage settled into my bones. I didn't know how yet. I didn't know when. But this betrayal would not be the end of me. I've lived through storms. I've buried people I loved. I've known hunger, pain, and loss. But nothing prepared me for the helplessness I felt sitting in a foreign country with no passport, no wallet, and no one to call. The pier grew quieter as night fell. The warm glow of sunset faded into a soft darkness broken only by the hum of boats and laughter from people dining along the water. They clinked their glasses, snapped photos, wrapped arms around each other. Families. Couples. People who belonged. And me, a 60-year-old man, abandoned like baggage no one wanted to claim. I made my way back to the lobby, my legs stiff and my hands trembling. The staff at the resort were kind but limited in what they could do. "We're so sorry, sir," the woman at the desk said. "Without identification, we can't extend your stay." I didn't blame her. She was just doing her job. But each word she spoke tightened the knot in my chest. I felt stripped of dignity. Stripped of control. I walked out into the humid night air and sat on a stone bench just outside the airport ferry terminal. The sound of the waves was steady, but my heart raced wildly. I clutched the small paper bag the resort had given me, a bottle of water, a banana, and nothing else. I tried calling her again from the hotel desk phone before leaving. No answer. Not even voicemail. She'd blocked me. The weight of that realization crushed me more than the sun beating down on me earlier that day. My daughter hadn't just left me behind. She had cut me off completely. As I sat there, people passed me with their suitcases, their laughter, their plans. I stared down at my hands, these old hands that once built a home, paid for her education, carried her when she was too small to walk. The same hands she now left empty. Hours dragged on. I drifted between numbness and quiet panic. My body ached, my stomach burned with hunger, and my pride, what was left of it, cracked open in the darkness. It wasn't just fear of being stranded. It was the humiliation. The humiliation of realizing my daughter had calculated every step of this. The resort manager eventually called a local liaison who helped contact the embassy. But they couldn't do anything that night. I'd have to wait until the next day to start the process of replacing my travel documents. So I spent the night at the ferry terminal. I leaned against the cold metal bench, the sound of waves slapping against the dock. I watched strangers come and go, their laughter filling the air like cruel reminders of the life I thought I had. In those silent hours, memories played like a film reel in my mind. The day I held her for the first time. Her first steps. Her crying in my arms at her mother's funeral. The countless nights I stayed awake to make sure she was warm, safe, fed. And now, this. I whispered into the darkness, my voice barely holding steady, "Why?" The question didn't have an answer. By morning, exhaustion had dug its claws deep into my bones. My throat was dry, my head throbbed, but something else stirred beneath all that pain, a different kind of fire. The embassy was small, crowded, and painfully slow. Paperwork. Questions. Hours of waiting. My hands shook as I signed the forms. They said it would take a few days to issue temporary travel documents. A few days. I nodded silently. What else could I do? As I left the embassy and sat under the shade of a palm tree with nothing but the clothes on my back, I realized this was my lowest point. She had stripped me of everything, money, identification, security, and left me exposed like a man the world had forgotten. But she had made one mistake. She had forgotten that the man she abandoned wasn't weak. I had built everything she enjoyed. I had survived much worse than being left behind. That night, I promised myself, when I return home, the daughter who left me here would not be returning to the same house. She would be returning to a father she no longer recognized. I'll never forget the morning everything started to shift, not because the sun was brighter or the world was kinder, but because I finally stopped feeling like a victim. I woke up on that ferry terminal bench with stiff legs, an empty stomach, and a heart still heavy from the night before. But beneath all of that, there was something new. A quiet, burning resolve. I wasn't going to let her end me like this. The embassy visit the next day was long, painfully slow. But this time, I wasn't sitting like a helpless man. I was watching, thinking, calculating. As I waited for the paperwork to move through the system, a woman approached me in the small waiting room, a local staff member who had overheard my story when I spoke to the consul. She gently asked, "Sir, are you alone here?" I nodded, my voice low. "My daughter left me." Her eyes softened. She told me her name was Aisha, and though she worked part-time at the embassy cafe, she had contacts in the city who could help with accommodation for a few days. She arranged for a small, clean guesthouse, not the luxury resort I'd arrived at with my daughter, but a place where I could at least sleep under a roof and eat a warm meal. That night, in that modest room with its creaking fan and the sound of waves through the window, I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling. My hands were clasped on my chest like I was holding something together inside me. She thought I was weak. She thought abandoning me here would give her a head start to take everything I owned. But she didn't know who raised her. The next morning, Aisha came again to check on me. "You'll get home soon," she said kindly. "But when you do, don't let her hurt you twice." Her words cut through me. Simple. Sharp. Real. I began making calls using the embassy phone. I reached out to my lawyer back home, a man who'd handled my estate paperwork for years. He told me something that made my blood run cold. "Sir, your daughter's already been here," he said. "She tried to access the documents. She said you gave her permission to manage your affairs while you were on vacation." My hand tightened around the receiver. "She what?" "She brought a signed letter," he continued. "Or rather, a forged one. But we didn't process it. It didn't match your legal signature exactly." I felt my pulse pound in my ears. She hadn't just abandoned me to hurt me. She abandoned me to clear the path. While I was stranded thousands of miles away, she was already trying to transfer everything I'd worked my whole life for into her own hands. But luck, or maybe something greater, had stopped her. And now, I knew exactly what she was after.
That night, I sat by the guesthouse window with a notebook the manager lent me. I wrote down everything I remembered, the way she had started talking about the house during the trip, how she had distanced herself, the exact timing of her disappearance. Each detail was a piece of her plan. And I was going to use it against her. A few days later, my temporary travel documents were ready. I walked through the departure gate with nothing but a worn suitcase someone had given me, a few embassy papers, and a promise I'd made to myself in that quiet room. I will not be her victim. I will be her reckoning. On the plane ride home, I stared out the window as the endless blue of the Indian Ocean stretched below me. I thought of her face, of the little girl who once held my hand and called me her hero. But I also thought of the woman she'd become, the woman who left me to rot for money. And somewhere between those clouds, my pain hardened into something cold and steady. She thought she'd left me behind in the Maldives. But what she didn't know was that the man stepping off that plane wasn't the same man she abandoned. The man coming home was carrying something far more dangerous than anger. He was carrying a plan. The day I stepped off that plane, I wasn't the same man who had stood alone on that pier. The airport air felt colder, sharper, not because the temperature had changed, but because I had. The betrayal had burned away whatever softness I once had for her schemes. What she didn't know was that by abandoning me, she had handed me the clarity I'd needed for years. When I reached my house, everything looked deceptively normal. The flowers I'd planted years ago still leaned against the wooden fence. The gate creaked the same way it always did. But what struck me wasn't the house itself, it was the car in the driveway. Her car. Parked like she already owned the place. She wasn't there when I arrived, but the house told its own story. Shoes by the door. Her bags in the hallway. A stack of unopened mail with her name scrawled across some envelopes she had no right to touch. It was as if she'd moved in permanently while I was stranded thousands of miles away. I didn't rage. I didn't shout. I simply sat in the living room, in the same armchair where I had held her as a child, and stared at the photographs on the wall. The young girl who used to smile at me from those frames was long gone. What remained was a woman who saw her father not as family, but as a stepping stone. The first call I made wasn't to her. It was to my lawyer. "Lock everything down," I said flatly. Within hours, a cascade of actions was set in motion. My accounts were frozen and restructured into a private trust. Property titles were transferred into a legal structure she could never access without my explicit approval. Power of attorney documents she once had copies of, revoked and reissued. All my assets rerouted, sealed, fortified. I also contacted my financial advisor. We spent long hours going through every account, every policy, every paper I'd ever signed. Every door she thought she'd walk through was quietly bolted shut. While all this happened, she was living in my house as if she had already won. She didn't know that with every smile she gave to the neighbors, with every casual toss of her keys onto my table, her window of opportunity was closing. 3 days later, I sat with David, my lawyer, in his office. A man I'd trusted for years. We reviewed the documents together. "With this structure," he said, tapping the folder, "even if she tries to sell anything or move funds, it'll bounce right back. Legally, she'll have no ground to stand on. It's ironclad." I nodded slowly, a calm I hadn't felt in weeks settling into my chest. But this wasn't just about the money. It was about dignity. She had left me in a foreign country to strip me of everything I'd worked my entire life for. She wanted to leave me with nothing. Now, I would show her what nothing really looked like. I started changing the locks quietly. I had the alarm codes reset. The safe in my study, the one she always assumed she could access, was emptied and replaced with nothing but a single piece of paper. One line written on it. "You shouldn't have left me." The day I heard her car pull into the driveway, I didn't panic. I didn't prepare for a confrontation. I just waited. She walked through the front door like she owned the air in that house, laughing into her phone. She stopped when she saw me sitting in the living room, her smile faltering. "Dad," she said, feigning surprise. "You're home." "Yes," I answered, voice steady. "I am." She blinked, uneasy but trying to mask it. "I didn't think you'd be back so soon." I didn't respond to that. I just watched her, really watched her, as she placed her handbag on the table and straightened her dress. She didn't even try to pretend to feel guilty. That was when I knew the girl I'd once loved so fiercely was truly gone. Over the next few days, I let her live in ignorance. She still walked through the house as if nothing had changed, while I signed document after document behind closed doors. I met with my lawyer again, then my accountant. I called in favors from old friends, people who owed me loyalty. I wasn't plotting a loud war. I was building a silent one. And she didn't even see it coming. She was too busy talking to her friends on the phone, making plans, speaking about my house as her place. Too busy to realize every piece she thought she owned had already slipped through her fingers. She had abandoned me in paradise. But here, at home, I was setting a trap so perfect that when she finally discovered it, she wouldn't even have the strength to fight back. For years, I'd been her father. Her protector. Her provider. Now, I was going to become her reckoning. She returned a few days after I'd come back from the Maldives. I knew at the moment I heard the car pull into the driveway, that confident laugh, the clack of her heels on the path, the way she tossed her bag on the table as if nothing had happened. She expected a welcome home scene, relief, apologies, maybe a hug. She expected everything to step back into place like a scene in a movie. Instead, she found me sitting in the living room, the same armchair I'd worn down over the years, staring at a photograph of her mother. I didn't stand. I didn't run to her. I just looked up slowly, and the look on my face did what my voice would not do. It said, very simply, I know. Her smile faltered. For the first time in a long while, she looked unsure. She fluffed a cushion as if that could fix the feeling. Dad, she said, bright voice, too bright. You're back. That was fast. Maldives was amazing. You should have seen. She stopped because the room was quiet and the quiet had weight. She wandered through the house like a guest expecting praise for choosing the best room, checking the kitchen, opening the pantry, touching the backs of chairs. There were little changes she noticed immediately, different framed paperwork on the wall, a new nameplate on the study door. She paused at the study door, thumbed the handle, frowned when it squeaked differently than before. Small things. Tiny mismatches that rattled her composure. Where did you go? She asked, too casual. I kept trying to call. The resort said you left early. Her words were a test. She wanted to see if she could bait me into confusion. I went to see David, I said, and the name dropped between us like a stone. David was my lawyer of 30 years, the man who had been at my side when I made those plans after your mother died. We took care of a few things. Her fingers tightened on the strap of her bag. What things? Administrative things, I answered. Legal things. She laughed too loudly. Like what? You mean, you signed something? Dad, you can't just. She trailed off because there was paperwork on the coffee table now, envelope stamped with my name, an official-looking letter from the bank, and a crisp copy of a trust confirmation. She scanned them, eyes bright but stomach dropping. She tried to read faster than the truth could settle. I changed the locks yesterday, I said calmly, watching her read. Just a precaution. You don't need to panic. Panic flashed across her face like lightning. She walked to the front door and tried the handle. It was new, solid. She turned it as if it might still open the old way, and when it didn't, she ran a hand through her hair and forced a laugh. That's ridiculous, Dad. You can't do that. This is my home too. It is our home, I corrected softly. It's been mine the longest. The paperwork reflects that. I put things into a trust. The accounts have been secured. Your name is no longer on the power of attorney you signed last month. Her mouth opened. She looked like a diver surfacing. Shock, then gulping for air. You changed the paperwork. You can't do that. I have rights. I handled things while you were gone, I paid the bills, I took care of the garden. You took what you wanted while I was waiting on a jetty in another country, I said, the words clipped, but not cruel. I watched her for the smallest fraction of time, remembering the child who once sat on my knee asking if the moon belonged to us. That child had been replaced by someone who measured love by profit margins. She darted to the study, rifled through the papers on my desk as if a single page would flip the world back. She checked the safe, then the bank statements on the computer, but they were locked, redirected, inaccessible. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages, and each time she glanced at it, hopes rose and fell on the tiny screen. Friends she'd relied on for support were suddenly slow to answer. People who had flocked to her during my absence were now hesitant. Someone had already started quiet conversations on the street about propriety and legality. At one point she stomped into the kitchen and grabbed a glass. Her hands shook. Who told you to do all this? She demanded. David and I said. And Daniel supports it. She flinched at his name like it had been a slap. Daniel, my other son, had been steady through all of this, the brother who had stayed true when things got complicated. Michael's presence had been different, he had chosen to be here without choosing to be present. Daniel had come by during my absence as often as he could, and he'd been the one I trusted. He'd been assigned trustee of the trust in the event I needed someone who respected the house and our family's memory. "Dad, this is insane," she hissed. "You left me nothing. You can't legally do this and just expect me to." "I already did it," I said. "I expected you to ask why. I expected you to try and speak for what you think you deserve. But I didn't expect you to leave me in a country without my passport." Her face contorted as the memory collided with reality. For a moment she was speechless, and in that silence the neighbor's windows seemed to watch. People had already begun to whisper. The woman next door, who'd once brought over casseroles when my wife was alive, stopped by later with a tray of food and a look of cautious support that said more than words. The community, which she had believed would flock to her side because of her charm, now watched the scales tip. She paced. She tried to bait me with emotion, with the old stories about how I had given everything for her education, about how I owed her for helping me with medicine and food while recovering. I listened. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I let her rage exhaust itself. That was the point. The man she had abandoned was not going to be baited into a public scene. He had paperwork and patience, she had excuses and thin alliances. "I'll sue you," she finally said, eyes blazing, voice small but dangerous. "I'll go to court. You can't do this to me." "If you want to," I said, quietly. "You will find a judge will look at the signatures and the trust, and then the answer will be clear." She slammed a drawer, then sat. For a long time she stared at the floor, the same floor she'd danced on years ago when she was a child. I sat opposite her, my hands folded, not triumphant, only steady. I had not come back looking for victory. I had come back to reclaim a life someone tried to steal while I lay stranded on a jetty. When she finally spoke again, it wasn't with the fired-up anger she'd had at first. It was lower, threaded with a panic that felt real. "Why did you do this? Why would you?" "Because love isn't a blank check," I said simply. "Because you left me to make it easy for yourself. I had to protect what we built from someone who forgot how to be a child of it." She looked at me then as if seeing me for the first time, tired but unbroken. Her eyes searched for the old man who would forgive at a word, and found instead a man who had learned to close the doors that needed closing. The calm between us was a different kind of violence. It was the quiet that comes before consequences land. She had expected scenes, she hadn't prepared for silence. Outside, the street hummed with gossip. Inside, our house, my house, had new walls that even she could not cross. She had returned expecting to continue her life where she left off. Instead, she found a father who had finally taken off the disguise of helplessness and put on the armor of certainty. And that was the setup. She thought she'd left me behind in paradise. Instead, I'd returned and built a quiet fort around everything she'd hoped to take. She would spend the next days testing doors and lawyers and luck. But the truth was already inked. She'd come home to find that the man she abandoned was no longer the man who needed saving. He was the man who had learned how to protect himself, and all she could do now was watch as the world she expected to inherit quietly closed its gates. The confrontation wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. For weeks she'd walked through my house trying to pretend she still had power, slamming drawers, whispering into her phone, showing up at meetings she thought she could control. But I was waiting. Calmly. Quietly. And when the day came, it unfolded exactly the way I knew it would. It was a gray morning when David, my lawyer, arrived with the final documents in hand. The trust was sealed, the property titles restructured, and every single door she thought she could pry open was legally locked. I'd made sure of it. We sat at the dining table I'd built with my own hands decades ago. That table had hosted birthdays, Christmas dinners, laughter, and now, it would host something very different. She walked in still half expecting to bluff her way through. She'd painted her lips bright red that day, dressed in one of those outfits that made her feel invincible. But when she saw David sitting there, folders laid out, signatures already in place, she froze for the briefest second. "Dad," she said slowly. "What's going on?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted her to sit in that silence. To feel, for once, that she wasn't the one steering the moment. David leaned forward. "We're finalizing some things," he said evenly. "It concerns the house. The assets. Everything under your father's name." Her eyes flickered, the quick, nervous flick of someone realizing the ground beneath them isn't as solid as they thought. She tried to play it cool, pulling out a chair across from me. "Shouldn't I be part of this?" she asked with a smirk that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You already were," I said quietly. "You just didn't realize your part was over." "What does that even mean?" Her voice tightened. David opened the folder and slid a stack of legal documents across the table toward her. Trust deed. Asset protection. Updated will. Power of attorney revocation. Every page stamped, sealed, finalized. She skimmed the papers, and with each turn of a page, her face drained a little more color. "What is this?" she demanded. "It's my house," I said. "My estate. My life. And I've just made sure that the person who abandoned me thousands of miles away can't touch a single piece of it." Her head snapped up, fury flashing in her eyes. "You can't do this to me." I leaned back, calm, measured. "I already did. You're my father," she spat, voice trembling. "I'm your daughter. Everything you built is supposed to come to me." I met her eyes steadily. "I built it. I decide where it goes. And right now, it's not going to someone who left me like I was nothing." The room felt smaller with every word. David remained silent, watching, a steady presence beside me. She slammed the papers down on the table and stood, her voice rising. "You're punishing me because I made a mistake." "A mistake?" I interrupted softly. "A mistake is forgetting to call. A mistake is missing a birthday. What you did wasn't a mistake. It was betrayal. Planned. Calculated. Cruel." She flinched like the words hit something deep. "I didn't." "Yes, you did," I said, my voice now edged with steel. "You forged my signature. You tried to take what wasn't yours. And before you did that, you left me stranded in another country like a burden you wanted to discard. So don't stand there and tell me it was a mistake." For a moment, all she could do was breathe, fast, shallow, panicked breaths. I could see the realization setting in. She had overplayed her hand. David cleared his throat softly and added, "Legally, you have no claim to any of your father's assets. Not now, not later. Everything has been secured through an irrevocable trust. Any further attempts to claim or manipulate these assets will be treated as fraud." She stared at him as if the words were in a language she didn't understand. Then her eyes swung back to me. "You're choosing to humiliate me," she whispered. "No," I said firmly. "I'm choosing to protect myself." Her voice cracked, anger and panic tangled together. "After everything I've done for you?" I almost laughed. "For me?" She had done nothing but chip away at everything I built. I didn't raise my voice, though. That was the beauty of it. She screamed, I stayed silent. That silence was louder than anything she could throw at me. I stood slowly, steadying myself with my cane. "You thought leaving me there would give you power. But it didn't. It gave me clarity. I may be old. I may be slower than I used to be. But I'm not weak. Not anymore." The last bit of defiance flickered in her. "I'll fight this," she said through clenched teeth. David closed the folder with a quiet, final snap. "You're welcome to try. But you'll find you're fighting shadows." She sat back down heavily, staring at the table like the world she'd imagined was cracking in front of her. She whispered something under her breath, maybe a curse, maybe a plea. I didn't care anymore. Then she said, louder, "You're choosing him over me, aren't you?" "Daniel." I didn't hesitate. "I'm choosing the child who didn't abandon me." The silence after that was heavier than the shouting. Her face crumpled, not from guilt, I don't think, but from the realization that for the first time in her life, she couldn't control the narrative. She'd built her world on the assumption that I'd always be soft, always forgive, always bend. But that day, she met a different man. She shoved her chair back, stormed toward the door, then turned back at me with a shaky, furious voice. "You'll regret this," she said. I met her gaze without blinking. "No. I already regretted trusting you. I don't have anything left to regret." She slammed the door on her way out. The house trembled for a second, then fell silent. David exhaled. "Are you all right?" I nodded slowly. "Yes. For the first time in a long time, I am." Because that was the moment it truly ended. She couldn't take my house. She couldn't touch my future. She couldn't manipulate my guilt anymore. The reckoning had come, not with fists, not with shouts, but with signatures, silence, and the weight of truth. She left me in paradise believing I'd crumble. But in this living room, on that quiet morning, it was she who walked away with nothing. I knew she would come back. People like my daughter don't accept losing easily. She'd spent weeks convincing herself that everything I owned was already hers, the house, the land, the accounts. In her mind, she was untouchable. So I wasn't surprised when, 3 days after the confrontation, I heard her car outside again. But this time, she wasn't walking in with that triumphant smirk she wore the day I returned from Maldives. This time, her steps were rushed, anxious. She pushed open the gate like she expected to still find her kingdom waiting. What she didn't know was that everything she believed she controlled was already gone from her grasp. She walked straight to the front door and paused. The locks. They had been changed. Again. I could see it in her face, that instant of panic when the world you thought was yours no longer opens for you. She tried her key twice. It didn't even turn. I opened the door slowly and stood there in the doorway, not angry, not gloating, just steady. "You're back," I said calmly. Her eyes darted around the living room behind me. "Why would you change the locks?" she snapped. "This is my house too." "No," I said softly. "It never was. You just believed it was." She pushed past me like someone trying to reclaim ground they no longer own, and when she stepped into the house, her face froze. Everything she'd arranged, the clothes she'd dumped in the hallway, the bags, the fancy furniture she'd ordered on my credit card while I was away, it was all gone. The living room was clean. Empty. Just the furniture that belonged to me and her late mother. She spun around to face me. "Where is my stuff?" "Removed," I replied simply. "All of it. You have no legal right to store anything here. Everything in this house now belongs to the trust. And you're not on it." Her voice rose, high and desperate. "You can't just erase me from my own home." I stepped forward slowly. "I didn't erase you. You did that yourself the moment you abandoned me. I just made sure your betrayal didn't come with a prize." She stormed toward the study, hoping to find papers, proof, something she could use. But she found nothing. Every document was already locked away off-site, secured, and witnessed. She turned and ran to the garage, same result. The car she'd been using, which she loved to call hers, wasn't there anymore. It had been repossessed days earlier. She had never made a single payment on it, and legally, it was mine. I followed behind her slowly, letting the silence work its way into her bones. This was the moment I had prepared for, not with shouting, but with structure. A kind of justice colder than rage. She stood in the middle of the living room, fists clenched, breathing hard. "I can take you to court for this," she hissed. "You can try," I said. "But you'll be suing the trust. And you'll lose." It was like watching a mirror crack in slow motion. All the entitlement, all the certainty she had built her world upon, collapsing under the weight of something she couldn't control. "Why are you doing this to me?" she whispered finally. I looked at her for a long time, not at the angry woman in front of me, but at the child I once carried on my shoulders, the little girl who once promised she'd take care of me. That version of her no longer existed. "I'm not doing anything to you," I said quietly. "I'm just refusing to let you destroy me." She dropped onto the couch, staring at the floor, her breaths shallow. For the first time since this all began, she wasn't yelling or threatening. She was silent. And silence was something she'd never learned how to live in. Then she noticed the envelope on the coffee table. It wasn't thick or complicated. Just a single letter. Her hands shook as she opened it. It was a notice of eviction. My lawyer had filed it the day after our confrontation. Legally airtight. Her last tie to the house was gone. She looked up at me like she was seeing me for the first time, not the soft, tired father she'd always assumed she could manipulate, but a man who had learned to fight back without lifting his voice. "This house," I said slowly, "was built with your mother. With love. With sacrifice. And you tried to take it like a thief in the night. But you can't steal what's already been guarded." She wanted to say something. I could see it on her face. But words failed her. A moment later, she stood and walked to the door. No shouting this time. No dramatic threats. Just quiet defeat. As she stepped out, she turned once more. "I didn't think you had it in you," she said, bitterness coating every word. I nodded slightly. "Neither did you." And then she was gone. The door closed softly behind her, not slammed like before. This time, the house didn't tremble. It felt still. Whole. Safe. That was the justice she could never have expected, not loud, not vengeful, but poetic. She had returned home to claim everything, only to realize there was nothing left for her to claim. She had abandoned me in paradise, thinking I would be broken. But she was the one left standing outside, with nothing but the echo of the home she lost. The house was quiet again. Not the kind of silence that hurts, the kind that heals. For months, every creak of the floorboards, every slam of a door, every sound in these walls had felt like a reminder of betrayal. But now, it was mine again. Completely mine. The night after she left for good, I made myself a cup of tea, just the way I used to when her mother was alive. I sat by the window, listening to the wind rustling through the trees in the yard. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. Deeply. Freely. I didn't need to shout to win. I didn't need to punish her with fists or words. I simply took back what was always mine. And in doing so, I reclaimed something far more precious than a house, my dignity. She tried reaching out once, a few weeks later. Her voice on the phone was smaller than I remembered. "Dad," she said, "can we talk?" I didn't hang up. But I didn't rush to forgive either. "You made your choices," I told her softly. "Now you live with them. That's how the world works, even for family." She was quiet on the other end of the line for a long time. Then she whispered, "I didn't think you'd ever fight back." "I didn't," I said. "I just stopped letting you hurt me." There was nothing left to say after that. I didn't close the door on her completely. But I no longer lived in a house where guilt could chain me down. If one day she found her way back, not for what I owned, but for who I am, maybe things could change. But until then, the peace I'd built was mine to protect. Weeks passed, and the house began to feel alive again. Daniel started visiting more often. We fixed the fence together one weekend, just like old times. We laughed. We shared stories about her mother, the kind of memories that warmed the air instead of darkening it. I also found a strange comfort in the quiet routines, watering the plants, opening the curtains each morning, locking the door at night without that gnawing fear of being betrayed again. I had rebuilt something stronger than the walls of this house. I had rebuilt myself. Loudspeaker, if you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, if you've ever been made to feel powerless, I want you to remember something: silence isn't weakness. Preparation isn't cruelty. Sometimes, the best revenge is protecting your peace. I leaned back in my chair that night, tea still warm in my hands, and looked around at the home I'd built. This time, it didn't feel like a place I was defending. It felt like a place I belonged to again. My daughter left me in paradise, thinking she'd broken me. But the truth is, she gave me back my strength. And this time, no one will ever take it from me again.